The Green agenda is taking inspiration from the illiberal days of lockdown. What's happening in Oxford?
Well, Oxford has something called a 15-minute city that they want to implement. We have already been told by Duncan Enright, who's got the title as a cabinet as being the head of transport and development, but actually seems to not want to do too much development and only want certain kinds of transport. What they want to do... now, bear in mind that Oxford already has lots of LTNs, low-traffic neighbourhoods, which we've seen happen all across the country. There's been gridlock in places like Hackney, Haringey and in Brixton, and we'll come back to that. But they have a number of LTNs that have really suffocated local businesses and residents. And now they're saying what they want to have is bus gates. They call them all a trial. They say it's a trial. When they did, but they have bus gates, which will mean you can't drive in many arteries, and you're only allowed 100 passes a year. So if you have 2 cars, that means 50 each, to go to certain areas, and you otherwise have to go much further around a whole ring road. So it's meaning that people's journeys that are really important are getting massively delayed. There's far more pollution. It's allegedly to stop some pollution, they say, but there's pollution often in very run-down areas. Many people in East Oxford who are much poorer and much more run down, they don't have facilities around them in 15 minutes to walk to. So once again, ordinary people are being punished more. But the thing that's most problematic with this in Oxford, and we're seeing it happen in some other cities across the UK, is that when consultations go out, like they have done with the low-traffic neighbourhoods, the majority of people are responding saying no. 5,600 respondents in Oxford responded. And if you look at, there was a Freedom of Information form, if you look at the responses on some, over 3,600 were negative on one of them, which constituted 93%. In spite of all of that, and also people going around saying that, there were representatives saying the majority of people believe in this, businesses have challenged it, residents have challenged it, and they're still going ahead. And they're calling it all a trial, but the trial of the 15-minute city can't exist without the trial of the LTNs. And as Duncan Enright said, it's happening anyway. Now, another thing to note about this, where this has come from is that the international C40s, which is mayors internationally, who Sadiq Khan is currently the chair of that, so they're from around the States and other countries internationally, we've got a declaration to tackle the emergency climate crisis. Right. As though the issue in cities is not better hospitals or housing or infrastructure or transport or any of those things, but there's this crisis. It's almost like a perpetual state of crisis, rather than a sober addressing of how we deal with things if there are some conditions that we need to change. And he, in London, Sadiq Khan, who's the current mayor, who's now saying he's going to stand for a 3rd term, has said, well, even though 73% responded against ULEZ expansion, where you have taxi drivers and, again, working-class people being impacted in their areas, and it's another tax on drivers and impositions, even though we said that, well, it's not a referendum, I'm not really that interested, I'm not doing it like that, utterly undemocratic, a whole patrician attitude. We've seen that, the Muslim community in Oxford can't get to the mosque, elderly people and others. And what's going to be happening is, I know certainly at Together we have a lot of signatories and members in Oxford, in Edinburgh, in Cardiff and in Canterbury, where these things are all happening. They are organising and they're getting vocal. And I think that people should realise that, you might think that this is a done deal, but a lot of people are very unhappy. And just as lockdown has finished and we've gone through all of this and all these businesses are suffering, now a lot of them are being killed by this, and it's really, really wrong.
Does it sound to you, Stephanie, like, oh, this benevolent thing, we're going to save the planet and it's not going to be a huge imposition, but it's got this coercive undertone where there's no lack of choice, and as Alan's just explained so brilliantly, no lack of democracy in this decision-making process?
Well, absolutely. I think that's one of the most objectionable, concerning things, is the fact that any objections from residents is or will be overruled. But I think, we've spent much of the morning talking about freedom of speech. This is about freedom of choice, the choice to use whatever transport that is available to you, that you can afford, as to how you move. I think we're all agreed that, of course, there is a climate emergency. We're all agreed that we need to...
I don't think we are. That kind of sentence troubles me. I think we all agree that we need to look after our planet, dispose of your waste. Let's not fill our seas with plastic. Let's have clean water. Let's try and have clean air where possible. But that's what I think this is all predicated on, this idea that there is an emergency and therefore we have to change the minutiae of our life. We have to go back to that, don't we?
Well, absolutely. But this strategy that's been deployed or thought up by this group that Alan referenced, perhaps takes into consideration all of that. But what it doesn't do, or the concern is, it doesn't take into account the more vulnerable parts of our society in terms of trying to implement a policy that is for the good of the planet and so forth, but not thinking about the real everyday life implications of deploying this policy.
I'm not, of course we worry about the vulnerable in society, of course we do. But this doesn't, I'm not objecting to this on that basis. I want all members of society to have freedom to go around everywhere. It will impact on your right if you're a wheelchair user maybe and you can't just hop on a bicycle like Sadiq Khan thinks we all can in the morning, or taking the kids to swimming club via the supermarket. You can't do that on a bicycle, or particularly on a bus. It's completely detached from real life. Yeah. So what should people do, Alan?
Well, I think in the first instance, in each of these cities, there are already established groups who've been challenging LTNs and the 15-minute city.
So that's low-traffic neighbourhoods.
Neighbourhoods, yeah. And there's a number of campaigns that are happening in London and across the country. In Oxford, there are going to be some more things happening. On January 24th, the council is going to be stating how this next thing's going to be rolled out. And just to say, they have a plan that both for the hospital and the schools, there's going to be an additional tax on car parks. So key workers, teachers, nurses and others, are now going to be charged double the amount to bring their cars in. Oxford's already in many areas not a livable city for key workers. Yeah. This is going to be imposed on them. This is by a mixture of Labour, Lib Dems and Green, but actually the Conservatives wanted it as well. This whole idea that we're caring and considerate, what tends to happen all the time is it's being impacted on the worst off. And so there's going to be a discussion about what happens with that. But I have a hunch that a lot of people, because I've seen already the groups that are there organised, and a lot more are going to be challenging and asking questions. I think people can put pressure on their local councillors and on their MPs and on the government. And we together are going to be representing some of our signatories and members in different cities, but also bringing this to national government because the whole way that we do our transport, infrastructure, housing, business are all interrelated.
And you know what?
This final point on net zero, everyone seems to think that it's a done deal. And yet I think it needs much more critical attention.
The whole thing does. And you know what? You won't really hear the BBC talking about Oxford's plans. You won't really hear the other channels discussing it. We're talking about it because it really affects you. And that's what's really important. And it will all happen without you having any consent.